welcome. Today we are running this webinar at the Legal Aid New South Wales Central Sydney office, and we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people listening today. My name is Jessica Sullivan and I work in the CLE or Community Legal Education branch, and I'm joined today by Julianne Elliott, who is a senior solicitor working for the CLE team who specialises in criminal justice and young people. So welcome, Julianne.
Hi, and thanks for asking me to speak today.
All good. We are happy to have you. So the purpose of today's today's webinar is to help anyone working with young people know about some of the criminal laws that can affect young people, to find out about the Children's Legal Service, to find out the free education workshops that we offer, and to make sure that you know where to send a young person for help. So referral pathways as well. So if we could start off, Julianne, with just if you could let everyone listening today your top 3 tips for working with young people, and if no one remembered anything else from today, what would the top 3 things you want them to remember be?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. I think when we're talking about criminal justice for young people, there are 3 really important things to remember, and they all have to do with young people's rights and access to justice. So if you have a young person who's in trouble with the police, the law says that they have to be allowed to call the Legal Aid Youth Hotline or the Aboriginal Legal Service, and that's so that young people can get advice before they decide to do interviews with the police, for example. It's a way for young people to get free advice. The second thing I'd say is really important is your right to silence. Most young people will know what you say in an American police show. If I ask a class to tell me what they say when police arrest someone on those shows, they'll all be able to recite, "You've got the right to remain silent. Anything you say will be held against you." And they all know that off by heart. But then you go on and ask, well, what does that actually mean? And that gets young people thinking about it. So at the police station or out in the world, if young people are being spoken to by the police about something they think, the police think that the young person's done wrong, young people always have a choice about whether they do an interview or not, whether they speak to the police about what happened. That right to silence means that you don't have to do the interview if you don't want to, but if you do the interview, everything's going to be recorded and can be used at court against you. So it's a really big decision to make, and luckily in New South Wales at least, no young person has to make that decision by themselves. One thing that young people do worry about though is that if they don't do an interview, they're going to get into extra trouble. But the law says you can't get into any extra trouble for not doing an interview if you don't want to. Okay, last thing would be support people. And support people are very important for young people who are down at the police station. The law is very clear. Young people shouldn't be spoken to by the police unless they have a support person present. That support person should be someone who's over 18 and who can help young people to, I suppose, advocate for young people at the police station. They have to sit in on any interviews that police do with young people in the police station. They might also be trying to reinforce what young people want to do at the police station in case they get scared. You can imagine a situation where 2 adult police officers are sitting across from one young person. It can be intimidating, even if young people never admit to be scared about anything. And yeah, so those 3 things will be the take-home messages for today's workshop.
Sounds brilliant. So let's start with a first poll question here for everybody, which is, when should a young person call the youth hotline? So the options that we have there is if they want to make a complaint about the police, if they are arrested by police, if police want to search their bag, or all of the above. Okay, so quite a few people have answered. I'll give it another couple of seconds. Okay, fabulous. So we've got 87% of you have said all of the above, and there's a few that have said if they are arrested by the police. Julianne, what is the correct answer here?
Well, the correct answer is that young people can call the police hotline for any of the above issues.
The youth hotline.
Oh, sorry.
The police hotline.
Oh.
The youth hotline.
Gosh, sorry, yes. The Legal Aid Youth Hotline, obviously, if they want to talk to a lawyer to get some advice, and all of the above. So all of those questions are correct. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's move on to the Children's Legal Service. So who are they and what do they do?
Okay, so the Children's Legal Service is a special part of legal aid. It's in the criminal division, and it's only dealing with young people who are in trouble with the police, or at least alleged to be in trouble with the police. So for anything that we're talking about today, when we say young people, what we're talking about is anyone who's under 18. Okay, well, obviously, once we turn 18, we become adults in the criminal justice system, and then they're dealt with by a different section. So there are about 4 different parts of the Children's Legal Service that we'll be talking about today. And the first one is the fact that no young person in New South Wales has to go to the Children's Court without having a free lawyer there. So that's probably the most, well-known aspect of what legal aid does. So all young people have to do is to turn up to court, to the Children's Court when they're meant to, and they'll get a lawyer to talk to them and to represent them for free. Now, some of the really important things to know about court representation is that the things that get heard in the Children's Court are only things that happened in New South Wales. So if a young person is charged with a crime in New South Wales, they can come to the Children's Court, but if they're charged with a crime, say in Victoria or Queensland, this causes sometimes a few problems on the border. So for the Wagga people, it's always a really good idea to double check about where the crime is said to have happened. We can only hear matters that start in New South Wales. Something else that people might not know is that if you're a defendant of an AVO, so if someone's saying that they needed an AVO to protect them from the young person, then we can also represent defendants in AVOs when they're under 18. Okay, so duty lawyer service, which means that a lawyer is employed directly by legal aid, will be appearing in all of the children's courts in the metro Sydney area, and also in Hunter and Illawarra. So anywhere outside of that, though, we're still going to have lawyers there, no problem, but they're not going to necessarily be legal aid employees. They might be private lawyers from the area. One other thing that I just wanted to really quickly talk about with court representation is that we're always direct representatives for the young person. That means that unless the young person's asking us to lie to the court, the kids are actually our boss. We have to do what they say. Obviously, our job is to give them really clear advice so they can make decisions for themselves, but ultimately, they're the ones, it's their matter, the young person's matter. So sometimes we have parents or other people who will come into the room with us, and they might think, oh, well, the lawyers said plead guilty today, but I don't think that the young person should. What we have to do is listen to what the young person wants. That does cause a bit of friction sometimes, but I think it's really important for us to all remember that it's the young person's choice. Just as if an adult went to a lawyer, then they would expect the same thing to happen, that no one else would be able to have control over what they said or what they decided with the lawyer. We've also got some other parts of the Children's Legal Service. We've got the telephone advice service that we've already touched on, the Legal Aid Youth Hotline, and we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail soon, so I'll leave that there for the moment. We also visit all of the juvenile justice centres in New South Wales. So at the moment, we have juvenile justice centres out towards Campbelltown. We've got one in St Mary's. We've got a few regional ones that you might be aware of, the Riverina Centre for the Wagga people, which is in Wagga, and we've got one up north in Grafton. So lots of times young people will, well, not lots of times, but if you have a client, for example, who is in lockup and you think, oh, are they going to be able to still get legal advice while they are there? We have two different ways that young people can get advice even when they are locked up, and that's by calling the Legal Aid Youth Hotline, and we also have a weekly service that goes out to all the juvenile justice centres to make sure that young people can ask questions about appealing their matters if they want to, or maybe they want to try and apply for bail. Again, what's happening generally, or any complaints that they might have. Lastly, what we're doing today is basically what my job is mainly, and it's one of the things that we do in the criminal law world to make sure that we're trying to get young people to think a little bit more about how the law works. If we think that if we take a child rights perspective, then the more young people know about the law, the better they can make decisions to keep themselves safe and out of trouble. So we run a number of different workshops for free across New South Wales, at schools, in juvenile justice centres, youth centres. If there's a midnight basketball tournament or a skate park that you want us to present in, we'll do that too, as long as we can talk to young people in a way that hopefully is accessible for them and on their terms, I suppose.
Awesome. Okay, so we've actually just had a question, which is the youth hotline only for criminal legal matters or also matters involving family law and youth?
Good question, actually. It's and we're going to talk a lot more about the Legal Aid Youth Hotline in a second, but it is just for criminal law matters. So under 18 with a criminal law question.
Okay,
thanks.
That's okay. So moving on, today we're talking about three main topics within the criminal law system, which are police powers, group offending, and sexting. But there are obviously lots of criminal problems that young people face, and they can get help with these by calling the youth hotline or getting in touch with the Children's Legal Service. So let's just have a quick overview of what are some of the other reasons a young person might call the hotline.
Okay, so we've already covered one of the reasons why you might have to call the hotline, and it's probably the main reason that young people do. It's the pointy end where the police might have them down at the station or they are under arrest with the police, and the law says they have to be allowed to get advice from a lawyer. So they're going to call us and we're going to have a chat to them about what the police think happened, what the young person thinks happened, and we're going to give them some advice about whether we think that they should do an interview or not based on their answers. At this point, we're going to have two main bits of advice. Either they're going to be eligible for a youth justice conference or caution, so that's a diversionary option that young people have in New South Wales. They may not have to go to court if the matter's not too serious, and we'll talk to them about all of the bits of youth offender diversionary options. Or we might be talking to young people about more serious crimes, in which case, generally speaking, we're giving advice about right to silence that we talked about before, that they don't have to do an interview, and we also make sure that we talk to the support people as well if young people give us permission to do that. We might also be talking to them about, at that time, we do get a lot of calls about AVO matters where the police think that they're going to put out an AVO on a young person. We'll be giving advice about that too. Also talking to young people about the kinds of conditions that might be on the AVO so that we can be really sure that young people really understand and don't accidentally breach just because they don't understand the conditions. What else? So one thing that people might not necessarily think about is driving offences. Sorry, we've jumped down to an issue that's kind of down the bottom. Sorry, Jess,
That's
I'm jumping all over the place. Driving offences are kind of interesting because the Children's Court only hears some of the traffic matters. In fact, most of the traffic matters for young people who have a licence already or they're old enough to have a licence will go to the local court actually. So once they're 16, generally they're going to be going off to the local court for traffic stuff. So drink driving or driving with drugs in their system, driving without a licence, etc. If they're younger than the age where they should have a licence or they could have a licence, then they're going to stay in the Children's Court. So sometimes we do get calls from the police station or from young people who have questions about their traffic matters. So if you have a young person that you're with who has these kind of questions, then they can call us. But you don't have to be under arrest already to call us with questions. When I'm out and about, I do try and encourage young people and community workers to give us a call if they have a young person with them or a young person they have as a client. I want to say as well that community workers can call for the young person if the young person's there already. Okay, if you want to put it on speakerphone because the young person's too nervous to call us by themselves, then that's totally fine, as long as we can check in with the young person to make sure they're there and that they can hear the advice. So what are some of the questions that might be asked if they're not under arrest? The police might want to ask the young person questions on the street. So sometimes we get questions about, can the police ask me my name? Can they ask to see my ID? And we're happy to answer questions like that if they have search-related questions. So I'm here with the police right now and they want to search my bag or my card. Do they have that right? They might have questions about what's happening with their case. Lots of young people get a bit overwhelmed at court and forget some of the details. Maybe they want to ring up and be reminded about when they have to go to court next or who their lawyer is. That's fine. They might also ring because they want to understand their bail conditions a bit better, or they might want to change some of their bail conditions. They might want to make a complaint against the police. Or lastly, perhaps they're already in lockup and they want to ask a question. They can always call us on the Legal Aid Youth Hotline, even from lockup, because their number is on their special card that they get when they enter lockup.
Fabulous.
I think that's it for that.
Okay, let's keep moving. So let's move on to police powers, but we're going to start with another poll question, which is, can the police ask a young person to move on without a reason? So what are our thoughts? The answers are yes or no. Can a police officer ask a young person to move on without a reason? Give it another second. Okay, so we're pretty split in our results here. We've got 49% yes, 51% no. Shall we discuss, Julianne?
Yes, we certainly can, and it's interesting that we've almost got half answers, and so, this is why we do education work with young people, because it's not always obvious what the answers are to these questions. So the answer is that they cannot, so no. Police can't ask young people to move on without a reason. They might do that sometimes, but there are reasons that have to be given. So we're going to look at 3 different kinds of police powers today, and the first one obviously is going to be move on powers, and we'll talk a little bit about why the answer to that question is no. The 3 things that I've chosen are kind of the things that might cause the most friction between young people and the police if they're out and about. it is important to remember that some young people have a lot of really negative experiences with the police. Some people don't have any experiences. But what we want to make sure is that we're always keeping a balance between what young people know about their rights and responsibilities and how they also talk to the police about what they know. So how do they negotiate successfully with the police without it escalating into more serious situations? So we're just going to do a quick rundown of move on powers now. First of all, it's not illegal for young people to hang out in public spaces. So generally speaking, young people can do their thing in public, but police do have the power to direct people to move on. They have to have a reason though. Okay, and when we're talking about move on, they can be moved on from public places like parks or private places like entertainment venues, train stations, and shopping centres especially. Now, what the police have to do is give you evidence that they're a police officer, unless they're in uniform. They have to give you their name and the place where they work, so the police station they work at, and then more importantly, they also have to ask you why, they also have to tell you why you're being moved on. There are some reasons that they can give, and it's often about something like if there's a bunch of kids sitting on the steps of a train station, no one can get through, for example, so they're causing an obstruction to people or traffic. So the police can ask them to move on then. They could also be, hanging out somewhere, swearing, mucking around, something like that. Somebody gets a bit nervous about a group of young people, and unfortunately there are times when groups of adults do get intimidated by young people, even if they're maybe just doing their thing out in public. But if someone makes a complaint about young people scaring other people, then they can be asked to move on for that too. Also, if they're hanging out in a place that the police know is a known drug spot, so drug distribution stop, somewhere where people go to buy or sell drugs, and the police know about that spot, they will definitely be moved on from there as well. Moving on means that they have to be given a reasonable direction. So maybe it's like something like stop fighting, or stop being so loud and swearing in public, move off the steps at a train station, move away from the bus stop now, not leave a suburb for 7 days. Okay, that would not be a reasonable direction. That would be too much. Okay, so the crime happens when the direction is reasonable that the police have given. They've given you all the warnings and information that they need to. For example, if you don't move on, we're going to charge you. It's an offence to move on, etc. And then you keep not moving on after that, and you don't have a good reason for not moving on. That's when you're going to be charged for failing to follow a police direction.
Right, okay. So next we've got search is another one of the police powers.
Searches are something that all the young people that I talk to seem to ask about. It's one of those common questions. And there are some really important things that we need to remember about searches. So personal searches, and we're going to also touch on mobile phones a little bit too. So the police can stop and search you or your bag or your car if you agree to it, and we're going to come back to that in a sec. If you're under arrest or in police custody, or if they think that you have something on you. And when I say think, it has to be a reasonable suspicion. So that's a bit of a legal word. Reasonable suspicion does not mean we got a description of someone who broke into a house up the road. That person was wearing, Wagga High School uniform, and you're wearing a Wagga High School uniform. Therefore, we've got reasonable suspicion to search you for housebreaking implements. That's not reasonable suspicion, because there are probably hundreds of students who would have the same uniform on, and that doesn't really narrow down the field. So if they went on to say, well, they were wearing that school uniform and they also had, you know, pink sneakers and, you know, dyed hair, a cap that was white with an insignia on it or something like that, and then the young person matched that description, then that would be more like a reasonable suspicion. There are other times that you could have reasonable suspicion, like if the police think that you look, you know, under the influence of drugs and they're searching for drugs, that kind of thing. But they always have to have a reason. They can't just walk up to people and search them just because they're young and on the street. And one of the things that young people seem to be saying to us is that this happens quite a lot. Some young people say that they could be searched, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. And that's probably pushing it a little bit. And if you have a client who is feeling like there's a lot of searches happening, I'd really encourage them to give us a call on the Legal Aid Youth Hotline, talk to you guys, and we can sort of talk about where we can go from there. Okay, so I always want to talk about searching by consent because there's a little bit of confusion sometimes. Oftentimes the police will come up to someone and say, oh, empty out your pockets, mate. And a young person might possibly reasonably think that that is not a question, that that's something that they're being told to do. In fact, they are being asked a question, okay, because you don't have to agree to empty out your pockets in that situation. You never have to agree to a search. And usually what I'd tell young people is that you should never agree to a search, because once you're agreeing to a search, then the police don't have to follow that rule about reasonable suspicion. If that means if the police found something when they were doing the search, then we can't go back and say, well, the police didn't follow the rules. There was no reason for them to pick that young person, because they've agreed, and that means that's it. We can't move on anymore with that. In terms of types of searches, hopefully the only one you'll ever hear about from any of your clients is a frisk or an ordinary search, which is basically a bit like a pat down, maybe taking off some of your outer clothes or a jacket, like a jacket. That can kind of be done again by with reasonable suspicion. Strip searches should only be done in very, very serious and urgent situations. And we have heard of situations where young people might have been strip searched on the street, which is really not meant to happen. You're meant to do the strip search somewhere in private, should have a support person present. It's pretty serious, and I'd say if you had any clients who had had a strip search recently, then again, give us a call on the Legal Aid Youth Hotline, and we'll have a chat to them about what we can do about that. Sniffer dogs, whole big thing. There is an Ombudsman's report now that says that sniffer dogs are not particularly useful. They make a lot of mistakes. Apparently, that's their research, not mine. But if a sniffer dog sits down right in front of you, then basically that's automatic reasonable suspicion for them to be able to search you. Mostly what I'd say is that, you know, sniffer dogs are in public, generally speaking. Of course, they're at all the music festivals, train stations. Sometimes they can go into venues as well, so licensed venues, although I'm assuming, hopefully, no one under 18 is in the licensed venue, but just for information. Lastly, just like when we were talking about move on powers, the police have rules to follow as well. So they have to say that they're a police officer. If they're not in uniform, they have to give their name, place and duty, and the reason for the search. With some of these things, with move on, with search, young people can ask questions about why these things are happening if the police don't give the answer. One of the things that we work on with young people a lot is how to ask those questions in a way that isn't just basically like, I know my rights, you need to tell me this, which might possibly lead to some escalation. We're trying to get young people to also think about how they can best communicate with the police. Yeah, so a little bit more on searches, because young people do want to, young people do want to know a little bit about mobile phones. So I'll just make a few quick points about when young people can have their phones searched, even if the police don't have a warrant. So if the police think that it's stolen, if they think that you have used the phone to, say, organise a fight, if you've videoed a crime perhaps on your phone and the police think you've done that, if they think you might be involved in drug and alcohol supply, then they might see if there's any text messages or other kind of messages on your phone. One really kind of well-known example is if you think they're somebody is lining up a fight or a riot somewhere, then the police can definitely take and search your phone in that situation. This issue is a little bit connected to one of the issues that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Police can police can confiscate a phone if they think that there are any child pornography images, and that will come up a little bit later again in our sexting workshop part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so our final one is arrest.
You'll be pleased to know that this is a little bit shorter. Okay, so if a young person's approached by the police, just remember they don't have to go with police unless they're under arrest. So they can say, "Oh, come down to the station with me," and young people can say no if they don't want to. Arrest means that they say that you're under arrest, why you're being arrested, what the police officer's name is, what station they're from, etc. And that's really important to understand the steps of arrest, because sometimes if a young person runs or struggles with the police once they've arrested you, you risk being charged with resist arrest or escaping from police custody. If it all happened before you're under arrest, then you didn't need to go with them anyway, so we'd have to have a little bit of a look at that.
Great. And just a reminder about the booklets that we have in here. So the youth hotline number is on the back. There's a little card on the back of these booklets, and these booklets can be ordered from our publications page on the Legal Aid website for free. So you can order these and have them to hand out to any young people that you work with or at a centre that you work at, etc.
Yeah, it's a really great booklet, and it's written very simply for young people to. It's a very small booklet. They can chuck it in their back pocket. And another thing to remember is that we have a workshop specifically on police powers, and it's got role plays, it's got quizzes, it's quite interactive, and it covers all this and more about how young people interact with the police and what police can and can't do, what young people can and can't do.
Great. And we'll put some details up towards the end about how to book a workshop or something for your group of young people or similar. So we're going to move on now to group offending. And again, we're just going to start with a poll to get an idea of what you guys are thinking. So the question is, if a young person agrees to be a lookout when their friend is robbing someone, can they be charged with robbery in company? That is the question. So the answers are true or false. And I'll just give you a couple of seconds to cast your vote. Okay, and we'll share that. And we've got 100% of people selecting true.
Well, that's excellent. No division there about whether we know what's happening with the law or not. Great work. I feel like now I don't even have to talk about it, but I will, just in case. I will, don't worry about it. I love to talk, obviously, as you can tell. So I guess the reason why we talk about group offending a lot, or why we've chosen this as the topic today, is that young people move around in groups. That's not, again, it's not illegal to be in a group, it's not illegal to be out in public, but if something illegal does happen in a group, it can sometimes be really hard for young people to tell when they're going to be in trouble, when they're not going to be in trouble. So the way that we talk about this issue is to ask 3 different questions. These are questions that the police will ask as well, and the courts. So the questions are, were you there? Did you know what was happening? And were you prepared to help out? So to give an example, to give the example from the poll, a young person agrees to be the lookout. So they're there at the time when the robbery happened. They knew what was happening because they've agreed with their friend. They know the friend is going to go off and rob someone around the corner, and they agreed to help out, obviously, by saying that they would be the lookout. It's better for us to talk to young people about this before it happens, okay? I've had situations before at court where young people have come and said, well, you know, I didn't touch the person, I wasn't really involved, I just, you know, they just asked me to stand there while it was happening, maybe to back up the main offender. So I should plead not guilty. And we then have to have a discussion about whether they can actually plead not guilty because of these 3 questions. If we answer yes to these 3 questions, they're not, they're involved, they're a main offender. If we only have 2 questions, so for example, I'm walking down the street, I see someone across the road being robbed of their phone. I'm there, I know what's happening because it's pretty obvious, but am I going to cross the road and help out? No. Well, not unless I wanted to get locked up, which I don't. So I'm not going to cross the road. I am going to probably call the police. And that means that we haven't said yes to all 3. I'm a witness, for example, not a main offender, because we haven't said yes to all 3.
Okay, and does that stand as well if that person doesn't call the police? So if that was a young person who'd seen something on the street, they were there, and then they've just watched it happen.
There's no law that says that you have to report something if you see it, but there'd certainly be quite a bit of trouble if you knew about something and the police asked you and you didn't tell them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a workshop as well that Julianne has played a very large part in creating, which is about this exact topic of group offending. Do you want to have a quick chat about Bern?
Yeah, sure. So Bern is one of the workshops that we've had for the longest time at Legal Aid, and it actually talks exactly about what I just talked about in the previous slide. The reason why it's such a great workshop, I think, is that we've got a short film that goes along with it, which is about half an hour, and the young people who were in the film were involved in writing the story and writing the script. The young people were not actors before they did the film. They were young people that we approached in youth services around Sydney to be involved. So I think even though it's been around for quite a while now, it still is a really engaging resource, and doesn't just talk about group offending, but also some of the things that we've talked about with police rights in custody. It is also important to remember that the rules around group offending don't just apply to more hardcore crimes like robbery, but also things like shoplifting, for example, any kind of crime really. But if there's a group of people helping it to happen, so maybe somebody said, well, I'm going to steal something, I'm going to steal this amazing dress from Super A. I don't know why it's always Super A, but it often is when we get calls on the Legal Aid Youth Hotline. and another young person says, well, I'll just stand in front of the CCTV camera and I'll, wait outside or whatever. So you can see that that's still a situation where a group of young people are there knowing what's happening and prepared to help out.
Great. And we've had a question about this exact thing, which we might just take, which is, are there any special considerations regarding young people with intellectual disabilities and group offending?
That's a really great question, actually. There are rules for the Children's Court that deal with people who have intellectual disabilities. It's not particularly for group offending as such, but there are things that we can talk to the court about if the young person does have an intellectual disability, which is kind of more to do with whether we sentence them or whether the matter's dismissed. We need to get a report about the young person and their intellectual disability, and that would go to how much trouble they'd get into or whether they end up being charged.
Okay. So in the interest of time, we'll keep on moving on. So our next topic is about sexting, and we're just going to do our final poll here to see what you all think. So the question is, if a young person is sent a nude picture they didn't want or ask for, can they still get in trouble for having it? So yes, no, or depends if they delete it or keep it. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that one. Okay, so we've had 69% of you answer depends if they delete it or keep it. And we've got 25% saying yes and 6 saying no. So we're a bit split on that one. What do we think, Julianne?
That's pretty standard for any class that I talk to about this issue. Tend to get a very mixed response, usually about half say yes and half say no. And then what I say is, well, how about we chuck in another answer, which is depends on what they do with the picture next.
Okay.
So the correct answer is depends if they delete it or keep it.
Wonderful. So sexting, what is it?
Okay, so I think probably by now, if you don't know what sexting is, it's great that you're here today, because I've been doing this workshop for a while now, and it seems to be an issue for lots and lots of schools and lots of youth services around the state. So basically, I want to start off not just with the definition, but also just having a think about the way that we want to talk to young people about this issue. And that is that most things that young people do online and on social media are totally fine. They're not illegal. What we do want to say is that when things do happen, when things do go wrong, there are some pretty serious crimes involved. So basically, if we're talking about sexting, mostly what we're talking about is any picture that shows actual sex, so people having sex, a sexual pose, or showing private parts, so genital, bum, or breasts. Young people get very embarrassed at this point, but it's pretty important that we actually talk about this in, really specifically. So any of those kind of pictures, generally speaking, can be considered child pornography. Now, we can see, even though young people are never going to use the word sexting, they'll probably use, things like nudes, dick pics, that kind of stuff. The issue that we have is that sexy pic, for example, is a bit better to describe it legally, because it doesn't have to be nude. It could be a sexual pose. Young people are fascinated to work out what is a sexual pose, what isn't. And the answer that I usually give is to think about all the people who might be looking at that photo to decide whether you should be charged with it or found guilty of a crime involving that pic. And that's a lot of old people, basically, lawyers, police, magistrates, etc. So the laws cover not just pics, but animations, drawings, filming, etc. And the picture has to be considered offensive. So if you picked up a phone and you saw the picture, then a reasonable person would be like, whoa, that's a lot of information. Again, what we're talking about is laws that may have not really kept up with technology so much. These are charges that were made originally to protect children from adults who might have pictures that they weren't meant to have. So your classic kind of pedophile, child pornography situation. What they didn't realize was that one day young people would have really awesome smartphone technology and be able to take pictures and videos and send them and ask for them and make them quite easily. So basically, what are the things that you can get in trouble for? Asking for a picture, making a picture, sending a picture, or sharing the picture around, or keeping a picture on your phone. These are all considered child pornography. Okay, the picture itself is child pornography if it shows sex, sexual pose, showing private parts, and the person in the picture is under 18. There's serious penalties for this, so up to 15 years imprisonment. Young people are not going to ever get that much time in jail, but the Child Protection Register is an issue. You can be put on the Child Protection Register. Once you're on that, you're on for life. You have reporting conditions for 7 years, and there's no chance that you're going to be able to work with children again. Okay, so the only other issue that I'd say is the age of consent. It's 16 for real life sex, let's just say that. So a young person can consent to real life sex when they're 16, but they can't consent to taking a picture of themselves and sending it to their partner until they're 18. And I think young people may not necessarily understand that.
Okay, so we've had a question here as well. If a young person engages in sexting of themselves, pictures, videos of themselves, can they be charged with production of child abuse materials?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Somebody who knows the difference between the New South Wales laws and the Commonwealth laws. So without getting into too much detail, because you know, we have to finish up reasonably soon, it is possible that that a young person can get in trouble for that. So taking a picture of themselves can still get them into trouble, yes.
Okay. All right, so there's a workshop that you have about this topic as well, which is called Putting the X in Sexy Text. What is it about?
Well, exactly what we were just talking about then. We have an interactive animation which we use to talk to young people about the criminal law implications to do with sexting, cyberbullying, the Child Protection Register, and what they can do about being bullied. It's really important that young people, again, just have a bit more of an understanding of the law when it comes to what they're doing on their phones. Hopefully, we're going to be doing that in a fairly non-judgmental way so that young people are empowered by that information and can go on to make really positive choices in their lives.
Great. So what's next? So what we really want you guys to remember and take away from today is that you can refer young people that you work with to the Children's Legal Service, the Youth Hotline, as we have mentioned multiple times, and I hope you've all memorised the number now, and we'll make sure that all young people know that. That you can request a free talk for your youth group or at a school or wherever. And you can order those little crime booklets. There's one about being street smart, and then there's also one about court smart, so what to do in court as well. So all of those things are options, and all of the links for this will be in the email that's being sent out to you after this webinar, or if you're watching this at a later date, they'll be in the notes below. Do you want to add anything there, Julianne?
No, I just happy to take questions at this stage. I know we've got a couple of minutes left, so.
Yep. So we've also had a question of, I work in Queanbeyan. Do you know how much of the information you've provided today might differ in the ACT?
Oof, that's a good question. I only work in New South Wales. most of the stuff with the sexting laws would be the same. I don't think that it will be too different. I don't know. There's the Legal Aid Youth Hotline definitely is only for New South Wales, but the rest would probably be fairly similar. But I'd suggest that you get advice or have a look on the ACT's Legal Aid website if you need some more information.
And I've got another question here about the sexting. Sending text messages of explicit sexual nature. So I'm assuming that means not pictures.
Yeah, so writing, like a story, definitely would count as child pornography if it's clear from the writing that they're talking about people who are under 18.
Right, okay. So I'll just keep moving on. So there are other legal problems, obviously, that young people can experience. And I just wanted to say that today we've discussed criminal law, but there are obviously lots of other problems. So they include consumer law problems like buying a mobile phone or getting into a phone contract, employment rights like getting a job, housing and tenancy problems like moving out of home or renting, fines that young people could get, including on public transport, from police or from driving, care and protection problems, family violence, what to do if your family is separating and how to be heard as the young person, or if you're a young parent. So there's going to be a lot more there's going to be some more youth-focused webinars coming up where we're going to talk about those issues and other issues. So just make sure that you keep an eye out for those. And now, if there are any other questions, please feel free to type them into the question panel. Julianne and I will stay around for about 10 minutes to answer those. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much again. And I hope this has helped you today to work with your young clients, especially those ones who are coming in contact with the police.
Okay, we've had some late questions coming in. So if police ask a young person to give them their mobile phone's password, what should they do?
This is really a tough question. I think probably the best situation is to call the Legal Aid Youth Hotline. I know that sounds a bit strange just to say that, but it really does depend on the situation. The law's not super clear on that, as you might have heard some stuff along the way about trying to break into iPhones and whether iPhones would give people a workaround if the FBI were investigating. It's just not a particularly settled bit of law. So give us a call on the hotline and we need to see what's what.
So is the hotline a free call for young people on their mobiles?
No, it's not. It's not free, but if it's from the police station, the police are going to be making that call for the young person.
Okay. So the next question we've got, what's the best course of action if your daughter, for example, or someone that you work with tells you that there's a photo going around at school from another girl?
That's a really good question. I guess there's a lot of information on the eSafety Commission's website. If you look up the eSafety Commissioner, you can find out a whole bunch more information. I suppose it really depends on what the young person wants to do themselves. So you're not going to get in trouble if you don't tell anyone, but if you do tell someone, then hopefully you've talked to the young person before you tell someone to see what they actually want to do about it.
Okay, can you please give us some more tips for support people, since we are a youth service that deal with this issue frequently?
Okay, this is a whole nother workshop in itself, so I'll just try and think of
In
a couple.
1 minute.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the important thing is that you're not just there to tick a box. You can actually be quite proactive. Some of the things that you would want to be doing is to make sure that if, for example, the young person says they don't want to do an interview, that you help to support the young person with that, especially if the police are saying, are you sure, that kind of thing, then you can help the young person to say, definitely, I don't want to do an interview. If there are problems during an interview, like they're crying, they're upset, it's clear that things are not going very well, young person, police not really understanding each other, you can ask for a break. You can ask for them to stop the interview because of those reasons. I think that's probably a good thing. And don't ask the young person anything about the offence. That's very important. Otherwise, you might be called as a witness. You might not want that.
So can the police ever stop a youth worker from being present while they're searching a young person?
They shouldn't be able to, no. As long as you're not in the way. It's a bit like when you when some people want to film a police interaction. The police shouldn't be able to stop you from doing that as long as you are not actually kind of standing in between the police officer and the young person.
Okay, great. And another great question that's just come in: should a young person still call the youth hotline even if they have access to the youth liaison police officer?
Absolutely. So the police have a very different role to play. The youth liaison police officer is important, but they're not going to be able to give legal advice to the young person.
And there's been a question as well about how to look for more of these webinars that'll be coming up and anything else that is on our YouTube channel. So I'll put in a link in the notes as well for you to sign up to our alerts, which is just an email that goes out maybe once every 2 months, just letting you know about exactly that, free webinars coming up or new resources, etc., etc. And I think we might end it there. We've got no more questions. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next time.